Cents Per Mile, featuring Charles Gracie, Paul Gibson, and Josh Haynes. Everyone knows the trucking industry has issues, but most people are afraid to talk about it.
Someone's got to do it.
With loads of recruiting and marketing experience and backed by the largest driver audience in the world, we deliver carriers the driver perspective, find solutions, and help make sense make sense.
Thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson.
Hey, I'm Josh Haynes. Gentlemen, new episode. What are we talking about today?
Talking about the communication between recruiting and operations.
And I think we might even get into some of the communication between operations and operations. But anyway, that being said, real quick, stuff we always say, we are on Spotify, we are on iHeartRadio, we are on Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube. So if you could like, subscribe, rate the podcast, wherever it is, that helps push us out and gets more eyes on us so we can do cooler stuff.
But you can also go to centspermilepodcast.com where you can suggest a topic, submit to be a guest, or even submit yourself to be a sponsor.
Oh, speaking of sponsors, who we got today?
We got TAFs. Put your trucking business in the hammer lane and make factoring fun with TAFs. Check them out at tafs.com.
All right, well, I think it's time for the news, and boy, do we have some news. All right, so it's time for 10-2 News, where we go back and we look at the craziest or coolest or most important stories from CDLLife over the past couple weeks. And the first one is a dash cam video that catches an airborne SUV flying across a Michigan interstate.
It's nuts. I mean, I've seen birds fly across their windshields. I've seen planes up in the sky when you're driving, but I've never seen an SUV fly over in front of my truck.
Yeah, that was pretty nuts that it actually went all the way over. Like you said, like I've been, going down the highway and seen like a wheel fall off and bounce back and stuff. But like, I also pretty impressed that SUV actually cleared the interstate.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying out for today's age, Evel Knievel.
Yeah, well, I mean, you want to talk about, drivers and falling asleep and stuff like that. That driver was definitely awake after that. But speaking of drivers who are very awake and actually angry, so there was a stolen rig, right? Like a stolen truck, and it got reported and they found it, and the guy who had stolen the truck, who was in the truck, got surrounded by police SUVs, right? And he just started pushing them, like not plowed through them, like lined up nose to nose, was pushing a line of cop cars to get away. That we don't necessarily have the video, but like, yeah, just straight up, it's you forget how powerful trucks are until you see them moving about 5, police SUVs.
There's just no commentary for that kind of stupid. I mean, there was no way that truck was going anywhere that those police weren't going to catch up. So all you did was aggravate the charges from being, I got a stolen truck, to now assaulting police and the damage to the vehicles.
Right, but I mean, if you're gonna go down, like, that's the way to get legendary.
And by no means is he offering any advice, just to be clear.
Yeah, no, for sure. Not advice. I'm just saying.
Hey, maybe that guy that was from the first clip that was flying over was an undercover cop, and the dash cam was from the semi truck in the second clip, and he was trying out for the new Fast and Furious movie, like family, and he was just flooring it. He's just a little early,
That checks out. Yeah, I mean, dude, that was just between both of those. That was just like, I guess the important takeaway is, drivers are out there and it's easy to pretend that they go around a map, but ultimately they run into some pretty crazy stuff.
Or they are some of the crazy stuff.
All right. Well, speaking of drivers and driving, it's time to go behind the wheel. All right, so it's time for Behind the Wheel. Being powered by CDLLife, we have access to the world's largest driver audience, and we get to ask them questions, so we get real opinions from real drivers about real issues. And today we're talking about how it's important for recruiting departments to stay in communication with operations, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but ideally because things change in operations. And so the recruiting team needs to be up on it to make sure that the applicants and the drivers who are thinking about coming to your company have a better idea. So we decided to ask the audience, where is the biggest breakdown in communication at most trucking companies? A, between recruiting and operations, they said 18%. B, operations and executives, they said 20%. C, Operations and safety, they said 14%. And D, operations and operations, was 47%.
How often have you gone into a trucking company and found out that two departments weren't communicating? But even more often than that is one department not communicating with the other side of it.
Well, and I mean, to be fair, operations does kind of lump in a few different, it's got like sub departments. You say, oh, operations, but then you have customer service, you have the dispatchers, you have the planners, so there's a lot that goes into that. But then you have the people over operations who change the operations, and then the people who do the operations have to change the operations, but then not everybody changes the operations. So operations changes all the time.
Speaking of operations, I think it's time to go behind the desk.
1.1 to 1.3 billion dollars. That's how much money the DOT estimates that drivers are losing due to excessive detention and dwell. Hey, I'm Kevin Nadeau. I'm a member of the Tenstreet leadership team, and I've been in the transportation and logistics industry for about 30 years now, primarily on the operations side. So what does truckload detention and dwell have to do with this communication between dispatch and operations, right? What's the point here? So we all know how challenging it is to recruit and hire quality drivers, but even more challenging is the retention aspect of it. You've done all that work to attract them, but you've got to keep them, right? One of the things I find the most is that companies often advertise their culture. We have a great culture. We believe in drivers, and drivers are the backbone of our company. But oftentimes that transition from recruiting to operations is bumpy, and that just sets the tone in the wrong way. So when it comes to detention and dwell, what can you do to help the driver out? Because the last thing you want to do is send them off for their first run and have them sit somewhere for 3.5 to 4 hours. The whole time they're contemplating whether or not they made the right decision. I would encourage you to check out Tenstreet's True Load Time tool. Think of it like a facility detention and dwell database. Type in the name of a company, type in an address, figure out where you're going, and look at those wait times in advance. If you do that, if your operations department does that and lets the driver know what to expect, well, their life is much easier. They can plan their rest breaks, refueling stops, meal breaks, DOT breaks, delivery windows. Most importantly, they know what to expect, so they're not caught off guard. It creates a relationship of trust, and it shows that you really do care about your drivers. So don't leave them out there hanging. Use True Load Time so that everyone is fully transparent and is aware of what's going on.
At TAFS, we offer unparalleled trucking excellence and service. Enjoy exclusive benefits like fantastic tire discounts and 1-hour advances for quick cash. Recognized as the top factoring company in 2023, we're your partner for success. Access business loans, manage finances with ease through our client portal, F2 fuel card, and mobile app. Contact us now to see how we can help your trucking business thrive.
All right, well, that was awesome. Tenstreet had a lot of great information. Kevin nailed it. That being said, prior to, we had some pretty good conversations already. Our main topic today is talking about recruiting and operations, basically working together. But the people have heard me say operations enough already in this episode, at least 15 times. What are your thoughts on this, Charles?
Often in recruiting, there's that understanding that everyone thinks that recruiters are full of crap. But when we dive into it, the communication between the recruiter and the driver, we often find out that they're given one-sheeters or information from the operations department that doesn't necessarily align with the marketing or the message that's being conveyed to the driver. And then once the driver's into the organization, there's a huge disconnect even further to what that whole experience looks like. So it's kind of goes back to like the Pittsburgh video of what was promised versus what's actually executed being two different things. That's where the breakdown happens. And we've talked about it on the show before. These departments should be collaborating and having conversations to make sure that they're aligned. So they're putting their best foot forward with these drivers.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's, from a marketing perspective, because that's usually the angle I come from. I think it's really important with your ads, or if you have a partner that you're using for your ads, not necessarily trying to plug CDLLife, but they're pretty good about it. Or if you're running your own, make sure that you're set up in a way to where you can pivot your ads, because those jobs pivot. You might have a situation where ops is like, yes, we need 20 drivers, but then maybe that customer has less freight available now, or they pulled someone else from somewhere else in the company to run it. And now if someone's out of a certain area, they told you they'd be out 1 week, they might be out 3 weeks now. And it's going to be very important to be able to adjust those ads accordingly. Otherwise, you're going to get a bunch of calls from people, and then you're going to tell them the job's way different. And then you're just basically wasting your time at that point.
Well, there's layers to this stuff. And people often forget that communication starts with the people behind the scenes trying to make all these moving pieces move in a similar direction. So the more feedback that you give to your marketing team from the recruiting perspective helps them align. And then the more feedback operations gives to recruiting helps them align. But it all starts with the communication, and operations need to be realistic. The worst thing you can do is go out there and communicate a message of the top 1% or 5%. And then the drivers that don't fit in that just think everyone's full of shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's huge too. And I think that's one thing when you are communicating as a recruiting department with your operations department, is to find out averages, not just because sometimes I've seen it before where I've asked an operations person, hey, what are drivers making on this route? And they'll literally go pull the top paid driver and then tell me that. I'm like, I don't want that. I want give me middle of the road. I want to give realistic expectations of what that looks like, versus just going out and putting, your top earners numbers, because as good as your driver might look on paper that you're bringing in might not be comparable to your best earner.
Well, and I think that's a great way to introduce our next guest. They've been on both sides of this, so I feel like now's a good time to bring in Chris Gonzalez. He's the Director of Agent Relations with F2F Transport.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today?
We're here, and we're talking operations and recruiting and how those two can communicate better for a better experience for all involved.
And I love both because, I've been on the driver's side, been the operations side, and I've been on the recruiting front. So looking at this from every perspective, and I'm also a vet as well. Really, if I want to get into the conversation, I do want to bring the vet experience up, and that's because how does the military handle problems like this, right? They over-communicate. You can never over-communicate. Everything from the beginning all the way through the end is written down, it's concise, and everybody follows the same thing, right? So when I first started in operations, I basically took that same exact, theory. If I had somebody recruiting for my group, I had somebody from operations essentially speak to that person right after the fact, right? We want to make sure that from the advertising to the recruiting to onboarding to operations, and even after they turn over, everything is essentially seamless across the board. And the only way you can really do that is you interact your recruiters with your operations team. Let your recruiters talk to your operations. Let your operations talk to your recruiters, right? The more they can communicate with each other, to your point, who are your top earners, and then what is your average? Let the person decide, am I a top earner or am I an average? But at least I know what both of those figures are, right? I know what my high and low numbers can be. Everybody advertises the 75 to 80 cents a mile. Be transparent about that. Is it really 75 cents? Is it 60 with 15 cents potential earnings, right? Be clear about it. A lot of that comes down to it, but it's just basic communication. Whoever you're working with, make sure they're aware of everything that you're aware of. And anything that you're not aware of, make sure you do your job and find that out, and then you communicate that to the people below you, right? If everybody does that, things will move a lot more seamless.
Well, you got to feed the feedback loop. And often you see that there's, a break in that. There's a stopping point where the feedback loop just stales out and doesn't go any further. And I think people need to identify where that's at. Some of the most successful recruiting initiatives that I've seen have been where safety, operations, recruiting, marketing, they're all working in the same direction, communicating, and constantly trying to look at innovative new ways to improve the overall experience. So tell us a little bit from your experience how that looks.
Well, first of all, your upper management has to set one equal goal, right? One goal that everybody could obtain. So I think somebody else brought up the point, different divisions within an operations. all those different divisions still have the same goal. So if you start setting different goals within your teams within operations, people are going to go different directions, right? Once that management sets that same goal, then they have to ensure that the people that are working it are following exactly what it is that's been established, right? If not, it's going to break all the way down to the driver. I've always said, you're everybody that works in operations is there to lube up our product, and our product is a great product that it is. It's the driver. It's that transportation. So if we can't take care of the assembly line, which is our operations team, your product's never going to run right, no matter how good of a product you got.
No, those are some good takeaways. And if someone wanted to reach out to you and work within your organization or get involved, how would they do so?
They can reach out to me at C. Gonzalez at f2ftransport.com. We're constantly looking for new agents. Agents obviously they've got their own trucks. They got their own book of business. So that communication goes from the customer all the way down to the driver.
All right, Chris. So Chris, real quick, you are the perfect person out of almost anyone we've had on to ask this question. Who's your favorite person on the show?
Oh, well, Paul, I've known you the longest. I'm sorry. It's going to go to you, man.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I got one.
There was only 82% more that voted opposite.
Hot Seat Services has Rent-A-Recruiter.
Wait!
Hey Michael, have you heard that Hot Seat Services Rent-A-Recruiter service will place their staff in your organization similar to a temporary hire model?
No way, what else does it do?
Follow me, I have to tell everyone. They take leads in existing databases to put new hires into your business's trucks.
Well, shiver me timbers! What else?
Come on! Their model is more cost efficient because their recruiters are trained and can get your pipeline flowing easier and faster.
No way. Anything else?
No matter how many hires they make, it's a set cost per week, so the more they get, the better their client's cost per hire gets.
Holy sh**.
For more information and to find out for yourself, go to hotseatservices.com.
Oh, well, that was awesome. I mean, also awesome that, it is what it is. Anyway, but now we're going to talk about it from the driver perspective. How do you communicate with operations and recruiting, or make sure the recruiter you're talking to is actually talking to operations from the driver perspective in the recruiting process? To give some insight on that so companies can see how drivers think, Charles, in your experience, how would you go about that?
Well, I always told you in past episodes that I'd give my recruiters the kind of put them through the ringer and put them through the test. I'd ask them questions that I knew that they wouldn't have the answers to unless they've done their research with operations. But I also asked to talk to those people. Like, I'm about to put my trust in you for my livelihood. I need to be my own advocate. And we've talked about that. Drivers should want to be their own advocate. And that means having those conversations on the front end. If I'm going to trust my livelihood and providing for my family, my lifestyle in your hands, then I should ask you those hard-hitting questions on the front end versus waiting to the back end when things didn't pan out. And then I also, again, the feedback loop, feed the feedback loop. When I found differences in what was told and what it was, and there's always some, you try to mitigate as many of those as possible. I made sure to go back to the person that told me something different and let them know, because that's, at that point, now you're putting it in their hands. Either you're going to be a good recruiter and learn from this, or you're going to be full of shit and continue to just sell the narrative. But at that point, now it's in your hands.
Yeah, and that checks out. And I mean, I know in my experience, that was always, because I feel like a lot of recruiters are afraid to say, I don't know, I'll find that out for you. Obviously, if it's something super simple, like what kind of models of trucks you have, you should know that.
If you don't,
then that's a whole nother. Call Charles. He does a boot camp. That being said, but I mean, if it's something very job specific, I don't think most drivers have an issue with that. They would rather you have to call them back and give them an answer than you give them the wrong answer. They show up and you were totally wrong. I think it's one of those things too. I think operations also appreciates that, because then they don't have a driver come in with different expectations that they now have to deal with.
Well, and here's another idea, and it's something I've implemented and it worked well. is having those communications. Everyone nowadays has technology at their fingertips, or should have. There's usually some sort of inter office communication, whether it's Slack, Teams, whatever. I always had a network set up where my recruiters knew that they can message this person to get this answer. I never wanted them to get off the phone with the driver, leaving unanswered questions unless there was no other alternative. So we always set up a web network for information. If it was safety related, logbook related, truck related, ops related, they had someone they can go to get that information. And in some cases, even backups in case they weren't available. So again, I think it's having the forethought to look out for those instances and providing the tools to reinforce your team to be the expert. They should be the expert in what they're selling and communicating. And that starts with the right foundation below them.
Yeah, and I mean that's another thing too that I found was really helpful in my time in recruiting. We would once a week, if possible, have a meeting between recruiting and operations, and we would give operations what we were pitching for the jobs that they said they needed, and then have them correct us if anything was wrong, and then we would give them a hiring area map, and they would adjust it, and then adjust the home time for the different areas, and we would keep that up at least once a week, just so that way, like, we were at least close. And so I think that's a solid practice. But speaking of meetings, we have both been in a lot of meetings with this next gentleman, and it's always super fun. So yeah, we've got Robert Pearson from MVT.
Guys, I'm excited to be on with you as always. Let's talk trucking.
So we're talking communication between recruiting and operations. And as the drivers identified, even operations to operations. Tell us a little bit from your experience how that looks.
Yeah, before getting here to MVT, one of the things I've consulted for about 30 trucking companies, a little over that, and one of the disturbing things in our industry is there's kind of the holy trilogy of a trucking company. You have sales, you have operations, and you have recruiting. In my mind, those are the three departments within the walls of a trucking company that generate revenue and rely solely on each other's efforts. Internally, my customer is operations. They take my end product, the drivers I bring into them, and they turn that into profit. Operations customer tends to be sales. Sales goes out, picks up the customer, and operations ends up having an end product that sales can go ahead and deliver on. A lot of trucking companies do not talk between those three departments. Realistically, in the world of recruiting, if you do not know what your operations department is doing, you're really just selling people you might as well sell them swampland in Florida. You do not know what they're doing or saying. And so it becomes really, 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 really important that if you're going to bring on a driver and they're going to stay with you 30 days, 6 months, 5 years, that you set them up for success. And so generally at MVT, recruiting operations and I meet at least once a week, sometimes multiple times a week. But the goal of that is to have that conversation of, hey, what are your needs? Where are we strong on freight? Where do we need to work on getting some strength in freight from our sales team? So we have a lot of unique engineered lanes, specific areas of the country that we work out of. But when I talk to a driver, I'm able to be very realistic. Hey, you live in an area that's not doing so well at this moment. It's probably not the best time to bring you on. Or you're in an area that we tend to be overbooked and freight is jumping. That driver will respond positively to your negative comment or your positive comment because you're just being honest with them. And that's a big deal to a driver. Drivers in this industry tend to jump around jobs a lot because they're not really placed in the right job at the right time from the right location. You can eliminate that problem as an industry if more of these companies have sales, operations, and recruiting meeting weekly, talking, knowing about each other's jobs, the good, the bad. And it's made a huge improvement to our turnover in the last 3 years. Our turnover has gone down about 40% annually. And the biggest reason for that is literally the communication between those three departments.
So that's interesting. And we've seen different variations of solutions that have been applied to this. I mean, you see a lot, especially on a lot of dedicated accounts where the account operations manager interviews the applicants. And that's worked dramatically to the benefit of the carrier when applied correctly. We've also seen it where people have applied that and these people are so busy that they're either very short with the drivers, they try to disqualify the drivers rather than communicate the position, or it drags out the time to hire so lengthy that the driver could find 3 jobs in the time it takes to get that interview set up. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things, and I'm very fortunate. I had an operational team that I walked into here that was willing to say, "My baby's ugly. What we're doing is not working." That's a really important thing. Having leadership at any company that can admit that what they have is failing, that doesn't happen very often. People get defensive, don't want to go down that pathway. And we realized our biggest issue that we needed to address was urgency, quickness, moving fast. So in terms of hiring process, the gambit was laid out there that, let's say we had a rehire as an example. Operations had an approval that they could give to it, but it had to happen within 6 business hours. If we didn't get that answer, that's an approval, and it got them moving on it. From the world of recruiting, we had the same issue. We'd take too long in the process of giving that driver a firm yes commitment. Operations pushed on us going, "Hey, if we have openings, you need to be telling them, hey, let's have you in on Monday of next week." Those 2 things on that urgency. And then once you hire a driver, that urgency still continues. So as an example, when you join MVT, let's say that you have an issue with an APU unit, just off the top of my head. There's a 24-hour window to have a solution in place and have it addressed, no matter who's in there, be it our maintenance team, operations, sales, whatever the case may be. Everybody has a clear understanding that you're going to have a driver solution within 24 hours, or that goes under your metrics of how you're judged and are you doing your job. That sense of urgency and communication within departments made the experience, in particular for a driver in their first 30 days, significantly more enjoyable. If no one has ownership, things don't happen.
So real quick here, I want to ask you, a lot of times when people are implementing all these different things, they forget about that time to hire. So from the time a interested applicant hits the door to the time that they get hired, what is that ideal range in your professional opinion?
I normally can get a driver approved within about 2 hours, but ideally, I want the driver to be the slowdown, not to us. So if I talk to a driver 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, I can have that driver in class on Monday. Now, the driver may not like that. I'd rather the driver be the driving force and it taking longer than that. So, a driver, as an example, may give a 2-week notice, or, hey, I need to take care of a couple things, get a new DOT medical. Can I do it the week after? Then us being the cause of that slowdown. Um, a lot of companies try to lay out a process here. Realistically, this is not laying out a timetable. If you can't tell somebody yes or no really, really quick within a 1-day period, you're overthinking this. Like, there's not a 3-week, there's not a 1 week. Realistically, what we're doing, if a recruiter has all the information that they need and they've ran all the reports, that recruiter has to have the autonomy to go, I like your background and it seems like you like us. Would you like to move forward? If that recruiter doesn't, it means you don't trust the recruiter and you probably have larger systemic issues.
Well, if someone wanted to get a hold of you guys and drive for you guys, how would they do so, Robert?
Absolutely. I tell them to go to Drive for MVT. That's Drive, the number 4, MVT.com. Check us out, review with us. We have a lot of wonderful opportunities, great home time, regional runs on engineered lanes, and I'm always looking for my next coworker to join our team.
Well, thank you for coming on Cents Per Mile once again. And before I let you leave, who's your favorite, Robert?
Well, so here's the thing, and I'm going to be honest to Paul. There was a payment that took place in the past that made me answer the way I'm about to answer. It's definitely Charles. Um, Charles, appreciate the bottle of bourbon, and you'll always be my favorite.
That seems to be a running theme. Charles got me a bottle of bourbon.
When you win, you win, my guy.
Yeah, is that anyway? So that being said, I appreciate the guests that we've recruited to have on today's episode, but operationally, it is time to go.
Once again, thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.